Welcome to my review of Yaira number 1, the first one of this character we have been waiting for quite a while, from the Rippaverse. It is by Jen and Sylvia Soska, and the artist is Deborah Carita. And this is the Rippaverse by Eric July, and this is the world that he is building, and this is the newest addition to the Rippaverse. And this is one that people have been waiting for a while. Alphacore was great. Isom is off to a really good start, but this character right here is someone who I think a lot of people, right from the start, when she first appeared in the first Isom book, it's just been intrigue because we don't know anything about her really, but she's been showing up since the first Isom book, and it's like, well, what is this character like? Who is she? Who the hell is this character even about? And we finally get to learn a little bit, or quite a lot of it, but also not that much in this book, because it's just the beginning of exploring this brand new character. I'm going to say it's a brand new character. We really haven't met her yet until this book. And now we get to really see what type of character she will be within this universe. Now, this review will be spoiler free. I will not be giving any big spoilers through this video. I'm just going to be talking generally how I felt about the story, as I kind of do with these reviews, because I know people are still getting the books as I'm probably going to put this out, and they want to, read it for themselves. But generally, I did like the book, but there's lots to get into with the book, because I think this is probably one of the most detailed of the books, like story-wise. They packed a lot into this. And the Soska Sisters, they put a lot into the story. They kicked it off big, and there's a lot of new stuff. So obviously with Isom, the first two Isoms, it was really grounded. It was more just following this one guy, slowly finding his way back into the superhero world and stuff. We find out that he quit and whatnot, and then we jump into the Alphacore stuff where they're still in the same city, and it's the police force that Isom dealt with, and it kind of expanded a little bit with that. And we've expanded with Bloodroot as well, with the fantasy horror type stuff that we're going to get with her. This one, I'm going to say we're getting intergalactic with this. Now, I'm not going to really go into details of what happens and why I say that, but we're getting pretty intergalactic, and we're getting really, really big with the universe with this book. And we're entering this different side of this comic universe here with Rippaverse that can expand to lots and lots of stuff. And with this character specifically, not even told in this book, there's so much of this character done in this book that can be explored later on. We've only just begun. So this book does pick up from her first appearance in Isom number 1. I don't know if that's considered a spoiler. I mean, we know what happens in Isom number 1 when she shows up for a moment, throws him on the car. We do pick up from there, and then the story goes on from there. So we get a better understanding of the timeline in this book rather than the Alphacore book, even though I really like Alphacore. I really do. I couldn't really place the timeline specifically. Maybe we'll find out later where the Alphacore story in their specific book takes place, but this one, we got a good understanding of where it takes place in terms of the Isom story. And there's lots of little tie-ins with the Isom story and the Alphacore stories. This isn't like a big merger book of like all these different stories at once, but it feels like the most like connected with them all so far. We got little bits and pieces of Isom's characters and story mixed in there, and we got little bits of Alphacore. And actually, Alphacore, we get a lot of Alphacore in Yaira number 1. There is a lot of Alphacore in this, and Alphacore is like the weaving characters now throughout all of these Rippaverse books so far. I don't know if that's going to be something going forward, or it's just, it has just been that way so far, and they've just happened to be in every one, and it fits the story so far. But Alphacore has appeared in all of the books so far, and Alphacore, man, I think Alphacore is probably my favorite characters to follow around right now in the Rippaverse. In general, they're just really interesting. And when you add on all these different relationships they have with characters like Yaira or Isom, it adds something even bigger. And I think it's just fun. So speaking of Alphacore, Brian Solari gets quite a heavy focus in this book. He gets obviously a nice heavy focus in his own book as well with Alphacore, but he gets another big heavy focus, and it's something that was actually kind of teased, I think, in Isom number 2. They don't go into detail of it, but there was some history with Brian and Yaira, and we get to see some more interactions with Brian and Yaira in this book. And I think it is a relationship and a character, relationship between two characters here that can be super interesting to see in the books going forward. It almost seems like they know each other more than we think, but sometimes it doesn't, and they got an interesting dynamic in this book. And it's almost like Yaira and him are battling it out, but also almost not. And there's reasons for that in this book, but I do think that dynamic was one of the more interesting ones of the book for sure. I really like Alphacore and their interactions with all of them. I think Alphacore is my favorite bit of Rippaverse so far, just probably because we've seen the most of them. If I'm going to be completely honest, it's because we've seen them the most. They're the ones that are connected to all of our characters. Now, in this book, we do get to learn a lot about Yaira, but also it opens it up for so much more to learn down the road. Okay, they leave plenty of stuff open for future stories and stuff we don't know about her, but we also do learn some big stuff about her past and about her current present state of where she is in her life and what she's doing around Texas and Florespark and whatnot. And we also get to see this new character that is Stefania Martinez, I believe that's her name. And she's a pretty heavily focused character, brand new character in this book, along with like the new villains that we get in this book. She's a pretty heavily focused character in this book as well. And you get to learn more about her specifically being linked with Yaira in some way. And not going to go into detail. This is trying to be spoiler free here, but she is quite linked with Yaira in a certain way. And it's not totally, it's kind of explained. It's kind of explained on how that might be, but it's also left for lots of different things that we can get with those two characters together, and it can explore even beyond that new character and just different connections and character connections that Yaira can have with people, and it expands the story to so much more later on. And I don't know if I dislike or like her character yet of Stefania, that new character in this book. She's okay, she's just starting out in this book, brand new character for this story. I think she's all right. I think she fit in this story for what they were trying to do. We'll have to see where her story goes in it. But I think she was okay. She did fit the story. And I am looking forward to seeing, especially with what they did with her at the end of the book, where they can go with her story with some of her other characters. I think that would be quite fun to watch, and I'm curious to see where that will go. So when we are speaking of characters from previous Rippaverse books and stuff, we do get to see Isom just for a moment at the beginning when we see the tie-in to him falling on the car. So this is very much like, it's like Yaira not showing up in Alphacore or Isom not being in Alphacore. He's not really in this book, but he is in it just for a little bit. So we do get to see Isom again, but it's kind of like a flashback to that time in Isom number 1. So we do get to see him again. We do get to see some other characters from Isom's books in this book as well. So it's not just Alphacore, it's also some other characters as well, because it's all in the same city. Some of the same characters all interact and show up around the area, and it kind of makes sense that way. But we do get to see some characters from each book show up once again. Now, one major part of diving into Yaira's history and her story and who she is explained and kind of explained within some of the villains that we get in this book. Now, I think in one of the other covers that we have for this book, you get to see this really insect looking creature. He is one of the villains in this book. And then there's 2 other villains that I can't really go into detail because it might kind of spoiler type of material there. But they are interesting. I think I like the bug guy a little more though. I think he is, I just think he's a little creepier. He's kind of cooler to me. He looks cooler. I do like him a little more, but I don't know how I feel about the villains overall in the book. I think they were fine. They weren't really my favorite villains. There was definitely some stuff that could be explored more, in the future if they tell us a little bit more about them. But with the way their story goes, I don't know how much more of that we will see. It all depends on what the story continues to give us, going Yaira number 2 and Yaira number 3. I do hope we get to hear a little bit more about those characters and figure out what they're about and who they're about, because we get little hints and pieces and kind of connection to Yaira that they have. But also we don't really know yet, and it just kind of felt like they were chasing her around and fighting her, and they were just really mad at her, which, that is something left to be explained later on. But I thought they were fine. They weren't bad. they were just, I think I liked like Lillian and Michael from the Alphacore book. I think I liked them the most so far in the Rippaverse books as the villains. I think they were the best villains we've had so far. I think I really liked what they were doing and the dynamic they were doing with manipulating people and having their influence throughout the book of Alphacore, and, you know, recruiting accepts and all these different people to do their crimes and whatnot. I did like that with those two villains from Alphacore, but this one, I think they were fine. I just hope we get to learn a little bit more of them. That's kind of what I hope to see. After reading Yaira number 1, I do feel like she is probably the most explained character so far in the Rippaverse. I think she is probably the most heavily explored character that we've now seen so far. They dive into quite a bit about her and, you know, maybe some of her past. And again, as I said, the current and the past and her story a little bit, where she is currently and why she's kind of there and what's kind of going on with her. We get to learn quite a bit of her, and I think she is definitely the most explained character so far. We learned, I think, the most of her out of all the characters so far shown throughout the last few books. You know, we're still learning Isom. You know, we're learning that he quit and he was, you know, finding his way back into becoming a superhero again. And with Alphacore, we're still kind of getting little bits and pieces of each member. I think we know the most of like Brian and stuff, but we really don't know that much yet. But in this one, I do feel like we get a lot of Yaira's story, but they also did a good job on leaving it where they didn't tell everything of Yaira's story. We still have a ton to explore. There is so much more that they can tell us about Yaira. It's very early. We could very much get different characters that go way beyond the exploration of Yaira and that are more heavily explored. We will have to wait and see. But right now, I feel like Yaira is a character that will be one of the most popular or the most popular character in the Rippaverse for quite a while. And the ways they're intertwining her character is such a major character. Like, she's not just like a little character that, you know, you'll get a cool side story or a cool book every now and then, or a story of her. This is a major player in the Rippaverse, I believe, and we're going to see a lot more of her going forwards. Not even just in her books. That's the way I think. I think we're going to see a lot of her. And this is only the beginning of this really, really major character and this major player here in the Rippaverse. Probably, I think right now more than Isom. I know Isom kicked off the Rippaverse, and we're going to have to wait and see where his story goes, because it's kind of like in limbo right now where his story is. But Isom and Yaira, obviously, those are the two big players. We've kind of figured that, but this book very much shows me that, like, Yaira is a major player here to stick around and stay for a while. And I'm very curious to see how big and how expansive this story of Yaira's will get. I think it is going to be the biggest and most expansive of the Rippaverse. I think it can get massive intergalactic stuff, crazy powers, and I think it'll be fun. I think it will really be fun, and this was just a good Kickstarter. Told us quite a bit about Yaira. Little things I think I liked more in other books, but overall, it wasn't a bad book. I enjoyed it. I read it through twice before I kicked off this review real quick. Just wanted to make sure I knew how I felt about the book, and I'm just trying to explain it the best I can without really spoiling the book for new people who are trying to read this. Now, I think you can read this book first as your first Rippaverse book, as you can probably with all the books so far, except for Isom 2, because that's continuing Isom 1. So really, you can start right now. You can start off with Isom, you can start off with Alphacore, you can start off with Yaira. But going into Yaira now, we're going to get deeper into the Rippaverse, and you will, like, it does help to read Isom, at least Isom number 1, to understand what was kind of happening right at the beginning of this book, because it does pick up from Yaira interacting with Isom for quite a quick little moment there. So that's kind of the best way I can cover Yaira number 1 from the Soska Sisters. I think it was good. I'm looking forward to a Yaira number 2. Definitely. I think it's got a lot of great potential going forward for the story. Really, really big, awesome story that we can get with her. I'm looking forward to it. And we got a lot of books coming. I think they got Gooding coming out here soon, and the Horseman book coming, and then Bloodruth. They got a lot of things planned. I think it's going to get a lot more exciting here going into this year and next year. They got a lot of stuff planned. And I'm looking forward to Isom's You know, his three book arc finishing up here probably, I don't know, next year maybe. But I'm looking forward to that too. This stuff is really fun. It's easy to get into because, look, I'm not a comic guy. I have never read really comics in my life up until recently. I've read these books. That's basically my big intro into reading a bunch of comics, and there's only 4 books out right now. You can easily get into the Rippaverse, and I think it's been fun so far. And I think we got a lot of good stuff coming because this was a fun book, and this is a very big player for the Rippaverse, and I'm looking forward to seeing where she shows up next.